Hi and welcome back. This week I'm going to be forging a larger diameter leather punch. So these punches are made out of two separate pieces. The cutting edge is a hard steel and I'm going to be welding that to a mild steel handle. The material I'm using for the cutting edge is an old file. Files have always been the go-to tool when anyone needed to have, readily accessible, top quality tool steel. But unfortunately in today's world you really can't trust anybody, and I'm told that a lot of files, especially the inexpensive ones, are just case hardened mild steel. They're not made out of a good quality steel anymore. I'm not sure when this got started, but it's probably a good idea from now on to just run a quick test on a file to make sure that it is a hardenable steel. The first thing that I need to do is take a few minutes and square up this stock. Files are tapered towards the tip, so I just need to bring that taper back so I have an even thickness, so that when I wrap it around in a circle I'll have two pieces that are the same size. I'm only putting a pretty basic scarf joint here. I'm not too worried about a visible weld line because there's going to be so much grinding done to this tool that I'll be down to solid metal by the time I'm done. Here I've cut the piece from the file and I'm just putting another scarf on the opposite end. The length of the piece that you're working with really doesn't matter. Again, if you're making a series of these, take note of the length that you're using so you can add and subtract whatever you need to make the other sizes that you want. But just as an example, I just picked an arbitrary length that I figured would be long enough to make a decent sized circle. But as a quick estimate, the length of the piece needs to be a little more than 3 times the diameter that you want to end up with. Of course, if you're working with thicker metal, you need to factor in the thickness of the stock that you're using, but for thin stuff like this, that'll get you pretty close to a final dimension. And the setup for welding this ring is exactly the same as I do for everything else. Take your time, don't overheat the piece, let the heat soak into the metal, and take very light hammer blows to set the weld. I'm not going to worry about getting the ring too round at this point. It's going to deform quite a bit as I'm welding the handle to the cutting edge, so all the truing up is going to need to be done after the two pieces are together. Now that I'm satisfied that I have a solid weld for the ring, I'm ready to move on to the handle, and for that I'm just going to be using a piece of 1/2-inch square bar. This is just mild steel, doesn't have to be anything special. I'm going to be upsetting the end of the bar very slightly. I basically just want the end to flare out on two sides. This will give me just a little bit of extra material when I need to make the scarves later on. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of upsetting, and then I'm going to flatten one face to make sure that all the material is moving off to the sides. Here I'm dressing up a hot cut that's gotten a little too thick. I don't grind away the material here, I just reforge the end to the shape that I'm looking for. This chisel is made out of spring steel, but I don't bother heat treating it. It's working in soft metal, so the toughness of the steel is all that you really need to have a serviceable tool. So once I reforge the end, I just let it cool down slowly and it's ready to go. So now I need to split the bars so it can wrap around the cylinder that I just made. The flared parts are sitting on the anvil, so they're to the left and right of this cut. Next I'm going to use a larger stake anvil to start curving the legs around. At this point I'm ready to start forging the scarf joints that's going to connect the handle to the cutting edge. Here's where I need that extra material that I upset earlier. The scarf needs to flare out on 3 sides, and if I didn't upset the material it would probably wind up being too thin, and by the time I forge welded it to the cutting edge there'd be hardly anything left there. So the extra material allows you to create a scarf that has a thicker cross section, and that gives you the forging time that you need to create a good solid weld between the handle and the cutting edge. And here's the part of the process that can get pretty frustrating. The handle needs to clamp on to the cutting edge while you have it in the fire and getting it ready to forge weld. So you have to play around with this until you get the fit just right. It's definitely a process that could use an extra set of hands if you have somebody available. But if not, it is, a little frustrating, but it eventually works. Once you have it held in position, you need to have your fire ready, and there needs to be a space for this to go. So use a pair of tongs or a poker or something to create a groove for this to sit in. You can't go jamming this into the fire because the ring will get knocked out of position. When all that's ready, pick it up very carefully and then just rest it inside the fire and carefully cover it with coals and get it to a welding heat. When you're ready to weld, reverse the process. Don't just pull it out of the fire. Use a poker to move the coals away from the piece and then bring it over to the anvil to tack it. Once you have one leg tacked in place, you can go ahead and fine-tune the position of the cylinder and get the other side ready for welding. When I'm satisfied that I have a couple of good welds there, I can do the final shaping of the piece. I'm not going to worry too much about the finish on the outside because that'll get taken care of with all the grinding that needs to be done to this piece. At this point I'm ready to head over to the grinder and start defining the shape of this piece. So here's the leather punch pretty much done. I've done all the grinding that I'm going to do. I've heat treated it, or at least I've hardened it. I'm getting ready to draw the temper right now, and once I've done that I'm going to hone the final cutting edge on it. So this is pretty much the way it's going to look. I haven't cut it from the bar yet. I'm using that as a handle, so that'll be the very last thing that I do when everything is done. I'm using the frying pan once again to draw the temper, and I put a test piece in so you can see the color that I'm going after. It's kind of a reddy brown. When the test piece has stabilized to that color, I know that I can put the piece that I'm working on in there, and I can leave it in there as long as I like it. It will not go beyond this temperature. So it's a handy way to heat treat a lot of material, or heat treat an awkward piece like this where there really isn't any way to get the heat to the cutting edge that you want. So I'm just going to put it in here and just roll it around until I'm convinced that the heat has traveled through the entire piece. You'll notice that I switched out the sand and I have some brass shavings in the frying pan. They transfer the heat a lot faster than sand does, so that makes the process a lot quicker and saves a lot on gas. So I'd like to thank ClickSpring for demonstrating that on his YouTube channel. If you haven't checked out his channel, please do so. He's working at the other end of the scale from me. I'm doing pretty crude stuff. He's working on probably the most refined, elegant things imaginable. He's a clockmaker, has a great site, and has a lot of great tips like this. So do check it out. So at this point all I need to do is go over to the hand grinder and put on the final edge and see how it works. Well, I got most of the way through. Obviously there's still an edge there that's a little flat, but everything held together and nothing shattered, so I guess we're all right. Hi, I'm Dennis, and thanks for watching. If you're interested in supporting this channel, the simplest way, of course, is to like, comment, and subscribe. If you have questions and you want to contact me directly, you can do so by emailing me at either one of the addresses that I have listed here. It may take me a couple of days, but I will get back to you. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.